Hello, my name is Dick Knoll, and this is my second video on the subject of what happens after we die. My first video in YouTube was entitled Afterlife and Faith, Knoll Testimony. In that video, I talked about various people's near-death experiences and shared near-death experiences and how they affected my personal belief in an afterlife. Watching those NDE videos and shared NDE videos, some of which were experienced by medical doctors, really strengthened my faith. In this video today, I want to go beyond just the watching of YouTube videos. I want to discuss what I have learned from reading books written by individuals who have had or who have studied near-death experiences, as well as books by well-known researchers who have studied the basic concept of consciousness and spirit. The most important conclusion reached by all of these authors is that the brain does not produce consciousness. Put another way, consciousness exists independently of the brain, and the brain only filters part of a general consciousness. This modern-day revolutionary theory helps explain why many of today's scientists, PhDs, MDs, philosophers, psychiatrists, as well as religious leaders all believe that one's spirit is separate from one's physical body and that one's spirit moves on after the physical body ceases to function. In this video, I will refer very briefly to what I feel are the most important highlights of 7 books I have read recently. The books are as follows. Life After Life. This is written by Dr. Raymond Moody. The second book is Irreducible Mind, Toward a Psychology for the 21st Century by Edward C. Kelly. The next book is called An End to Upside-Down Thinking, Dispelling the Myth that the Brain Produces Consciousness and the Implications for Everyday Life by Mark Gruber. The next book is called Not Yet, Near-Life Experiences and Lesson Learned by Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, a trauma surgeon in the ER. Then is followed by Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife by Dr. Eben Alexander. Then there is Lessons from the Light, What We Can Learn from Near-Death Experiences by Kenneth, PhD. And finally, To Heaven and Back, a doctor's extraordinary account of her death, heaven, angels, and life again by Dr. Mary C. Neal. I fully realize that most viewers who are interested in the subject of an afterlife really want to hear from people who have actually experienced an afterlife atmosphere, such as that described by near-death experiencers, or who in some other way have communicated directly with God or angels or at least deceased relatives. I have not had such direct communications, but I have had 3 instances where I believe God has indirectly, more subtly, communicated with me. I will describe what happened in those incidents later in this video. They all occurred during 2019, during the months I was doing my research on the afterlife subject. But first, let me try to briefly summarize the highlights that impressed me the most in each of the 7 books I just mentioned. First is Dr. Raymond Moody's Life After Life. As Dr. Moody says, after interviewing near-death experiencers from all over the world, from all cultures, there is something very persuasive about seeing a person describe his experience which cannot easily be conveyed in writing. The near-death experiences were real events to these people, including the doctors who had them, and if near-death experiences are real, they have very profound implications for what every one of us is doing with his or her life. For then it would be true that we cannot fully understand this life until we catch a glimpse of what lies beyond it. Several people in the medical field have written books about near-death experiences, and we will cover a couple of those in a minute. And they have gone so far as to tell Dr. Moody unequivocally that their near-death experiences revealed a reality beyond death and that their near-death experiences provide scientific evidence of an afterlife. Of course, those who assert that these experiences indicate an afterlife are pitted against those who propose neurophysiological explanations, including that NDEs are mere hallucinations produced by oxygen deprivation in a dying brain. But Dr. Moody has interviewed hundreds of people who have recounted their shared near-death experiences when someone else died. The bystanders themselves were not ill or injured, yet they reported the same elements that make up near-death experiences. For example, these bystanders report seeing a dying person's spirit leave the body, or they report and sometimes leaving their own bodies and rising upward toward a light with the spirits of their dying loved ones. Sometimes they even witness the life review. In other words, bystanders can empathetically co-live the dying experience of someone else. Dr. Moody finds no merit in neurophysiological explanations of near-death experiences. Instead, he trusts his medical colleagues and thousands of kind individuals from all over the world who have reported on their experiences, for in their best judgment they visited an afterlife full of love and light. The second book I mentioned is called Irreducible Mind by Edward C. Kelly. The evidence for out-of-body consciousness is well presented in this rigorous scientific analysis. This book is a landmark from a highly reputable group, the Division of Perceptual Studies, based at the University of Virginia. The book has much to say about near-death experiences as well as the subject of faith healing. Regarding near-death experiences, author Kelly tells us the first systematic study was done by a man named Helm, who published a report of 30 first-hand accounts, including his own, of experiences of mountain climbers who had fallen in the Alps, soldiers who were wounded in war, workers who had fallen from scaffolds, and individuals who have nearly died in accidents and near drownings. This study was important for bringing together for the first time a large number of these experiences, including experiences that occur not only when a person is physiologically near death, but when he or she only thinks that death is imminent. Similar studies were conducted by a man named Russell Noyes and also Dr. Raymond Moody, who I just mentioned earlier. And actually, near-death experiences, Kelly points out, are not infrequent. A collection at the University of Virginia totals 861 reports. Studies in the past decade suggest that near-death-like experience may occur in about 10 to 20% of patients close to death. NDEs can also occur when patients are suddenly confronted with death but escaped unharmed, as in falls or near accidents. Kelly mentioned in his book some of the features of near-death experiences, and you will hear about these features many times in my video. There are feelings of peace and joy, a sense of being outside one's body and watching events going on around one's body, a cessation of pain, seeing a dark tunnel or void, seeing an unusually bright light, sometimes a being of light that radiates love and may speak, encountering other beings, often deceased persons whom the experiencer recognizes, experiencing life reviews, sometimes accompanied by a feeling of judgment, seeing some other realm of great beauty, seeing a barrier beyond which the person cannot go, and finally returning to the body, often reluctant. One particularly noteworthy feature is that for many experiencers, an NDE permanently and dramatically alters the person's attitudes, beliefs, and values, often leading to beneficial transformations. For example, there can be increases in spirituality, concern for others, an appreciation of life, a heightened sense of purpose, and decreases in fear of death, materialistic attitudes, and in competitiveness. Regarding transcendent aspects, most near-death experiencers are convinced that during the NDE they temporarily separate from their physical bodies, and therefore that they may also survive the more permanent separation at death. 81% of the University of Virginia collection reported separation from body, and 82% were convinced of survival after death. Regarding the subject of religion and faith healing, author Kelly tells us that in 42 independent studies based on samples of 126,000 people, the analysis revealed a significant correlation between religious involvement and the reduction of mortality from a variety of causes. For example, Dr. Christian Kastorf described 10 cases of rapid and complete healing of serious and long-standing illnesses, including rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, cancer, and other debilitating and life-threatening diseases that had not been or could not be cured by conventional medical treatment. All these complete healings occurred during the 1970s, either during or shortly after the patients attended a large public service conducted by the well-known healer Catherine Kuhlman, and all are extensively documented by Dr. Kastorf, as well as by testimony from the patients and physicians involved. A summary comment here. In general terms, we can readily foresee a deepened cognitive mainstream in which the present elevation of the physical or physiological at the expense of consciousness and the mental has been essentially inverted. Consciousness should be more widely recognized as the constitutive problem of the field, and far greater resources and effort should be allocated than at present to research focused on the psychophysiological and neuroimaging studies of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. The third book, An End to Upside-Down Thinking by Mark Guber. I have much to say about this book. This book is a look at the evidence regarding the connection between the brain and consciousness. Contrary to what we have been taught, science does not know where consciousness comes from. Materialism needs to be reconsidered. Alternatively, a framework in which consciousness is the basis of reality explains various psychophenomena well. And if that framework is correct, we are on the brink of perhaps the most significant revolution in human history. Consciousness outside the brain is a scientific revolution, a drastic shift in the thinking about basic assumptions we've held for so long. Looking at the evidence, Dr. Jessica Utz, the 2016 president of the American Statistical Association, has studied the data on psychic research. She concludes, based on statistical analysis, that psychic phenomena are real. She said this in a 1995 report to Congress. Author Guber points out that if consciousness is fundamental, the key implications are as follows. 1. Materialism, the formation of modern science and much of modern thought, is wrong. 2. Consciousness is not produced by the brain. Rather, consciousness is non-local to the brain-body system. 3. We all have psychic abilities. 4. When our body dies, our consciousness does not die. And 5, we are all fundamentally connected as part of the same underlying consciousness. No one has proved that the brain produces consciousness. The brain is not the center of the mind. It is a powerful tool of the mind, says Gary Schwartz, Ph.D. of Harvard. The brain is an antenna receiver for the mind, like a sophisticated TV or cell phone. We are conscious in spite of our brains. The brain serves more as a reducing valve or filter, limiting pre-existing consciousness down to the trickle of the illusory here and now. Sir Sybil Burt, British psychiatrist, says it is far more probable that the brain is an organ for selecting and transmitting consciousness rather than for generating it. Very important. Regarding near-death experience, author Guber, in his research on this subject, learned that near-death experiences, or NDEs, are basically lucid memories with impaired or no brain function. Dr. Irvin Lazio says there is no known physiological mechanism that could account for consciousness experience in a non-functioning brain. The consciousness that then occurs cannot have been a product of the brain. The most logical explanation of NDEs doesn't include the brain at all. Instead, the evidence suggests that consciousness exists independently of the brain. Author Guber, in his book, reminds us that near-death experiences are typically prompted by events causing severe brain impairment, such as cardiac arrest, comas, near drownings, and other traumas. Roughly 13.5 million people in the U.S. alone have reported having a near-death experience. Professionals and healthcare providers began to discern patterns in the experience and in the aftermath of it. The first to study these patterns was who I mentioned earlier, Dr. Raymond Moody. In 1975, he wrote his book that came out, Life After Life. But before Moody's book, more than 30 articles in Western periodicals written by more than 25 authors discussed near-death experiences. Per physicist Dr. Klaus Swanson, the consistency in the accounts of near-death experiences is one aspect which gives them credibility. These accounts come from people of all ages, all cultures, and all regions. Again, near-death experiences transform people's life. Guber points out, as we have heard just before, people behave similarly after near-death experiences, often permanently and dramatically altering their attitudes, beliefs, and values, often leading to beneficial transformations. NDEs near-death experiencers tend to become less materialistic, less competitive, have a greater concern for others, fear death less, and feel a greater sense of purpose. For example, Anita Morgani was a terminally ill cancer patient, but after her near-death experience where she was immersed in unconditional love and talked to her deceased father and others, realized that she had been unnecessarily harsh and judgmental and had spent too much time worrying about the opinion of others. She realized by shifting her mindset she could cure herself of her cancer, which was stage 4, and she did it. Gober, in his book, lists the typical elements of a near-death experience, and as part of this list you've heard before. 1. Ineffability. Near-death experiences are very, very difficult to put into words. 2. Positive emotions. Unconditional love, peace, joy, no pain, feeling oneness. 3. Heightened senses, more consciousness and alertness than normal, some 360-degree vision. 4. Acknowledgement of being dead. 5. Out-of-body experience, often looking down on the body from above. 6. Encountering heavenly realms, beautiful landscapes, full of light, feeling peace and tranquility and love. 7. Experiencing a dark space or tunnel leading to a bright light. 1/3 of the group had this experience. 8. Encountering a mystical brilliant light or being of light, but not blinding. 9. Encountering other mystical or divine beings or deceased relatives. 10. A sense that time or space is different, that time somehow does not exist. 11. A panoramic life review, not only the perspective of the near-death experiencer, but also from the view of those affected. They get to judge themselves and learn lessons. See and feel the emotions of others you hurt, and you will be harder on yourself than anyone to judge you. 12. Encountering or learning special knowledge, understanding universal order and life purpose. 13. A preview or flash forward. Some people feel they can see part of the life yet to come, some of which is verified in the future. 14. Perceiving a boundary or barrier. A near-death experiencer sometimes are aware of crossing a certain boundary means they can't return to the body. And finally, there's a return to the body, either voluntary or involuntary. It is important to remember that most people who have near-death experiences are seriously ill or injured. Their brains are either severely compromised or not functioning at all. Yet near-death experiencers consistently describe the hyper-real pattern of experience. Dr. Long reminds us that according to mainstream neuroscientific assumptions, a brain under anesthesiology, which is about 23% of near-death experiencers, would not be able to produce lucid memories. Also, near-death experience in cardiac arrest patients who are clinically dead. Many patients had near-death experience in a study of cardiac arrest situations. The big question of the doctors and researchers was how could any brain-based hallucinations occur if the brain is not functional? In one case, consciousness and awareness appeared to occur during a 3-minute period when the heart was not beating. So again, findings suggest that the brain is not responsible for memory and consciousness. Next, author Gober writes about the subject of shared near-death experiences. This phenomena further counters the dying brain hypothesis. A shared near-death experience is an experience in which a healthy bystander has an NDE-like experience. This person is not dying, but is just there when a loved one is dying. Dr. Raymond Moody, who I've mentioned before, who has studied this, reports these type of events. 1. There's a change of geometry. The room changes shape, or alternate reality is experienced. 2. There's a mystical light. Some shared near-death experiencers report a bright light that emits peace, love, purity, and so on. 3. There sometimes is musical or musical sounds. 4. The out-of-body experience. Shared near-death experiences sometimes report floating out of their body and seeing the scene almost as a third-party observer. 5. Co-living a light review. For example, one shared near-death experiencer said, I was standing in front of what felt like a large screen with my husband who had just died, and we watched his life unfold before us. Some of it I had not known before. 6. Encountering otherworldly or heavenly realms. Dr. Moody points out that people often don't share these shared near-death experiences because they're afraid to be called crazy, or they might even lose their livelihood. The important conclusion here is that near-death experiences, shared near-death experiences, and fear-death experiences challenge conventional models of the brain's relationship to consciousness. If we consider reality to be the stream of consciousness, then our individual experiences are localizations of consciousness. Our ordinary, everyday perceptions fall within that localized whirlpool. If the whirlpool were to dissolve and delocalize, other parts of the stream would suddenly become accessible. Perhaps a temporary relocalization process is what occurs with near-death experiences and shared near-death experiences. Perhaps the broader stream of consciousness is no longer obfuscated from our perceptions. We access what was there the whole time, the broader stream of consciousness. It was drowned out by the noise of our everyday localized perceptions. So these experiences might truly be an opening of the filter rather than mere hallucinations caused by brain physiology. If we drop the materialist paradigm that says that the brain produces consciousness, and if instead we contend that consciousness is fundamental, then the experiences of near-death experiencers and shared near-death experiences should be taken seriously as lessons about the true nature of reality. If consciousness is the fundamental medium of reality rather than a product of the brain, then NDEs, SDEs, and near-death experiences can be viewed as glimpses into the broader reality that is normally hidden from our everyday perceptions. How about after-death communications? Bill and Judy Guggenheim collected 3,300 accounts of after-death experience in this book, Hello from Heaven. I have read this book and it's amazing. These findings show that people experience deceased in different ways: seeing an actual presence, hearing a voice, feeling a touch, smelling a fragrance, and seeing appearances while awake. Sometimes a combination of those things. I encourage you to get this book. It is just fascinating and is written in the most simple English you could imagine. How about Deathbed of Visions? Deathbed Visions. Dr. Emily Keller reports that 41% of the dying patients she examined experienced such a vision. People in dying days report encounters with loved ones, the sight of a beautiful unearthly environment and a bright light, a sense of unconditional love. And reports of deathbed visions come from people at the bedside of the dying person, who usually dies shortly after the vision occurs. In some deathbed vision cases, a bystander at the bedside perceives what the dying person sees. Well, if consciousness survives the death of the physical body, how would that change one's views of death? As stated by David Hawkins, MD, PhD, consciousness does not depend on physicality, but exist independently of it. Rather than view death as an end of life, death can alternatively be considered a transition from the physical world into some other state of being. Near-death experiencers might provide a glimpse into what the transition state is like. ND ears are clinically dead. Their brains are off, yet they have lucid, often blissful experiences. One may wonder then if near-death experiences provide a literal preview of what happens to one's consciousness when the physical body dies. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a very prominent end-of-life researcher, concludes that death is simply a shedding of the physical body like the butterfly sheds its cocoon. It is no different than taking off a suit of clothes one no longer needs. It is a transition to a higher state of consciousness where you continue to perceive, to understand, to laugh, and be able to grow. Panoramic life reviews of near-death experiences suggest that a primary reason for living is to learn and to evolve consciousness. In the life review, the near-death experiencer reviews his life from his perspective and from the perspective of those he affected in his life, all the while judging himself, as if to do better next time. Evidence in Mark Guber's book suggests that we are a consciousness first and foremost that is having the experience of a physical world through a body. And if we are indeed, as evidence in his book suggests, an entangled, interconnected stream of consciousness with no actual separation, with no beginning and no end, then how might we act toward ourselves and others? How might we run businesses? How might we run nations? Unfortunately, materialism is the dominant paradigm today, and it implies that we are fundamentally separate. My consciousness is separate from your consciousness. That belief that we are finite and separate is the disease underlying every problem in human society today. Anxiety, depression, interpersonal problems, racial and social prejudice, gender inequality, geopolitical unrest, violence, war, greed, all of these are symptoms of the disease. The world's problems are caused at the fundamental level by the pervasive underlying assumption that we are all finite, limited, and separate, and that stems from the materialistic belief that consciousness comes from the brain. But what if the unprovable religion of materialism is wrong? What if the brain does not produce consciousness? What if consciousness is the basis of reality and my consciousness, I, is the same as yours, which is the same as everybody's? What if we are all the same consciousness, simply looking at ourselves through different eyes? Altruism makes so much sense under this framework. Of course, it feels good to help another. By helping another, we are helping ourselves as part of the same underlying consciousness. Robert Spira, an internationally known spiritual teacher, suggests consciousness is the fundamental. Consciousness is the fundamental underlying reality, and overlooking, forgetting, or ignoring of this reality is the root cause of both the existential unhappiness that pervades and motivates most people's lives and the wider conflicts that exist between communities and nations. Conversely, the recognition of the fundamental reality of consciousness is the prerequisite and a necessary condition for an individual's quest for lasting happiness and at the same time world peace. The next book I would like to mention briefly, and all of the rest of these books I'll mention very briefly. The next one is Not Yet by a Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. He was an emergency room trauma doctor. Dr. O'Driscoll thinks this way. The boundary between mortality and eternity is a boundary often referred to as a veil, and it is drawn back in birth and death, allowing spirits to pass between realms of existence. If one is near the veil, if spiritually near, a portion of eternal glory may splash through onto him. And this has happened several times to Dr. O'Driscoll in the emergency room where he worked. So why don't more people see and hear these spirits coming and going like in the ER? Dr. O'Driscoll feels it is because we are wrapped in a veil of flesh that impedes our sight and mulls our hearing, and because our preoccupation with the things of this world block our spiritual receptiveness. Spirits are very near during birth and death, but the profound joy experienced when a child arrives and the deep sorrow experienced when a loved one leaves consume our attention, and the emotional extremes of mortality leave little room for spiritual awareness. Dr. O'Driscoll says that mortality falls between the curtains of our mortal bodies. On the left is birth, on the right is death. We set aside a portion of our glory to be here, to learn and experience and grow. The light and glory spills into this realm as souls pass through the veil. Sometimes souls or spirits or beings are coming and sometimes they're going. Occasionally they hover between. Once in a while a person from either side draws back the veil without passing through, giving a glimpse of eternity independent of both birth and death. In each of these scenarios, when we experience the light, we stand a little nearer to the glorious life that was once ours and will be again. Dr. O'Driscoll says, these things I know. There is omniscient, omnipotent, and infinite Creator who is above all things, benevolent and forgiving, and abounding in love. If that infinitely compassionate Creator is not omnipresent, then messengers, angels, emissaries, ambassadors, willing mortals, and untold other agents are. Dr. O'Driscoll says he is continually in the presence of deity, and if he is willing, he can be an agent of that divine being. Dr. O'Driscoll says that when he sheds his mortal veil, when he has what he calls near-life experiences, he sees who he is and who his neighbors are, and he realizes that we are all more alike than different. Our appearances may vary, our culture and context may be widely divergent, Our concepts of heaven and eternity and God may conflict for now, but when our spiritual eyes open, we see that we are all more alike. We all struggle with frustrating habits, but God wants us to let it go. Realize the insignificance of frustrating habits and let go of the guilt you may be hearing from the judgment of others about the things with which you struggle. You must stop imposing other people's judgments on your life. We all need to spend less time condemning and more time living and loving, even ourselves. The next book I want to highlight is Proof of Heaven by Dr. Eben Alexander. Dr. Alexander is a neurosurgeon who, while in a coma for several days, had a very telling and extensive near-death experience. He says, quote, "I know there will be people who will seek to invalidate my experience, and many who will discount it out of court because of a refusal to believe that what I underwent could be anything more than a crazy feverish dream. But I know better, and for the sake of those here on earth and those I met beyond the realm, I see it as my duty, both as a scientist and hence as a seeker of truth, and as a doctor devoted to helping people, to make it known to as many people as I can that what I underwent is true and real and of stunning importance. Not only was my journey about love, but it was also about how connected we all are, the very meaning of existence. You are loved. These are words I needed to hear, but it is also what every one of us in this materialist age needs to hear as well. Without the recovering memory of our larger connectedness and of the unconditional love of our Creator, we will always feel lost on earth. Dr. Alexander feels that his coma and near-death experience together illustrate clearly that the material realm is not all that exists, and that consciousness or spirit, yours and his, is the great and central mystery of the universe. Dr. Alexander says, "For all of the success of Western civilization, the world has paid a dear price in terms of the most crucial component of existence, our human spirit. The shadow or dark side of high technology, that is modern warfare, thoughtless homicide and suicide, urban blight, ecological mayhem, cataclysmic climate change, polarization of economic resources, all this is bad enough. But much worse, our focus on exponential progress in science and technology have left many of us relatively bereft in the realm of meaning and joy and of knowing how our lives fit into the grand scheme of existence of all eternity." Dr. Alexander, after his near-death experience, now understands just how blind to the full nature of the spiritual universe we are on earth, especially people like he had been, who had believed that matter was the core reality and that all else, thought, consciousness, ideas, emotion, spirit, were simply productions of it. This revelation inspired him greatly because it allowed him to see the staggering heights of communion and understanding that lie ahead for all of us when each of us leaves the limitations of our physical body and brain behind. Humor, irony, pathos, he had always thought these were qualities we humans develop to cope with this so often painful and unfair world. And they are. But in addition to being consolations, these qualities are recognitions, brief, flashing, but all-important, of the fact that whatever our struggles and sufferings in the present world are, they can't truly touch the larger, eternal being we in truth are. Laughter and irony are at heart reminders that we are not prisoners in this world, but voyagers through it. Finally, Dr. Alexander feels that God is present in all of us, omniscient, omnipotent, personal, and loving without conditions. We are connected as one through our divine link with God. The next book I would like to highlight is called Lessons from Light by Kenneth Ring, Ph.D., professor of psychology at the University of Connecticut. He is one of the foremost researchers of the near-death experience. Professor Ring says, and I quote, "Near-death experiencers are confronted with such a powerful vision and feeling so overwhelming that it is impossible not to recognize with one's whole being that one has crossed over into a greater life. For many of the near-death experiences, they enter a world of perfection, eternity itself, a state of exhaustive bliss and total knowledge." In a near-death experience, one finds these elements, he says, and they're similar to what we've heard before. The heralding light, the sense of returning home, the feeling of absolute safety, the knowledge that no one is excluded from this domain, and in some cases that we ourselves in our essence are made of some of the same light we glimpse there. It is little wonder that near-death experiencers as a whole have beliefs about an afterlife that are stated with rock-solid conviction. As one typical NDE experiencer said, and I quote him, "I know there is life after death. No one can shake my belief. I have no doubt. The atmosphere, it is total pure energy. It is knowledge. It's total love. Friends will not be lost to you. You will know beauty and peace and love, and that loving light that encompasses and fills you is God. Now I know with certainty that there is a separation of body and soul and that there is life after death." Most near-death experiencers have the same opinion, and it is not merely their unanimity of opinion, but the tone of absolute certitude that pervades them. It is not just a belief in an afterlife, but an unshakable assertion of a spiritual truth that has been apparently unmistakably apprehended in and through the light. In short, the typical near-death experiencer knows without question that life is not a dead end, but continues in an exalted form after the body has finally ceased to function. Professor Ring stresses, quote, "When hordes of near-death experiences from all over the world, including scientists, physicians, and philosophers, as well as religious persons, begin speaking as a single voice of their certainty concerning a post-mortem life based on their own experiences with death, a fracture in the wall of materialistic opinion begins to show itself." Professor Ring also stresses that a very important promise of the near-death experience is not that it suggests an afterlife, just that, as comforting as that can be, but what it says about how to live better in this life, with greater self-awareness, self-compassion, and concern for others. Near-death experiences have much to teach us about how to live in this world, that we are at this very moment and throughout our lives writing the script that will govern our soul's posthumous journey, that no one other than we ourselves is the shaper of our soul's destiny after death. I think Dr. Ring is talking about free will that is so important, that is given to us by God to make various decisions. Dr. Ring feels the light may indeed reflect our true nature and dissolve our personal sense of sin, but it can never absolve us of the responsibility for our own spiritual life and our familiar daily round in our relations to others. The lessons from the light are like type O blood, the universal donor to spirituality and religion. So a major point for Professor Ring is not so much how to interpret the light, but how to make use of the knowledge it affords. The last book I would like to mention is called To Heaven and Back by Dr. Mary Neal. Dr. Neal's near-death experience occurred in a near drowning that is described in detail in my first video, Faith and Afterlife, Null Testimony. In this video, I want to stress how sincere and believable she has been in sharing her near-death experience with others. She says, quote, "Ultimately, if the reading of my story could bring even one person closer to God, it would be worth the writing." And Dr. Neal, it has brought many people closer, I can tell you that. Dr. Neal says, although many people have said her experience is remarkable, what she finds more remarkable is how many people in our society readily believe outlandish and unsubstantiated urban myths and conspiracies, yet they disregard thousands of personal and consistent testimonies of miracles and near-death experiences from people through all cultures and religions. Dr. Neal feels that we live our lives in forward motion, but only fully understand them when looking backward, and this is true in my life. Only then can you clearly see how people, events, decisions, and outcomes are interconnected. She thinks you will see a pattern of linkage that cannot be attributed to statistical chance. You will see some evidence of God's work in your life, giving assurance that God has some kind of plan for your life. You will begin to recognize coincidental events for the miracles they really are, and you will know God is with you, even in times of sorrow, loneliness, and misfortune. Dr. Neal feels, as I do, that faith is what sets us free. Faith allows us to fully embrace life, dissolve fear, and replace worry with hope. Faith allows us to confidently walk with God into a future filled with joy, one that can become an extraordinary and amazing adventure. Dr. Neal concludes that God created us, knows us, loves us, and guides us. He wants us to live a life of gratitude, giving thanks in all circumstances. Well, that concludes the highlights of the 7 books I have read in my research on the subject of afterlife. As I stated in the beginning of this video, I myself have never had a near-death experience, nor have I talked directly to deceased relatives or deceased friends. However, there have been 3 incidents that have occurred in recent months where I believe God or his angels or messengers have more subtly communicated with me. The first incident occurred in April of 2019 after the fire that severely damaged the famous Notre Dame Cathedral in France. I was reading an article about the fire on my computer, and most of the top reactions from people about the article were how the fire had caused such a monumental tragedy, and also a few even suggested a conspiracy. I very seldom type in a comment on my computer and post it, but this time I felt somehow I should. I wrote, and I quote, "Perhaps the Lord wanted to remind us all that it is Holy Week and a time to accept Jesus as our Savior. Sometimes it takes this kind of tragic act to bring us to our senses of the importance of love and peace. The Spirit is still present and the church will be rebuilt." End of quote. I hit the post button, and immediately my comment appeared on my computer, and amazingly, right underneath it, a video appeared of an animated young girl wearing a crown. She did not speak, but she smiled and mouthed a yes, and gave me a clear thumbs-up movement with her right hand. I bookmarked that page, and I also printed out a copy of the remarks page, which shows the young girl, animated young girl. The video came up the instant I posted my comment. I have never seen that happen before on my computer, and I felt it was a subtle approval of someone in the heavenly realm. Here's the picture of the little girl, and this was actually a video right here that came under, right here, that came under my comment. The second incident that occurred was in September of 2019. In the early spring of 2019, I had planted a bunch of flower seeds in a small garden area in my backyard. But being an avid golfer and not so avid gardener, the garden area completely filled up with weeds. Everything was choked off. No flowers came up. The effort was a total failure. Then, in late September, one evening I was spending several hours composing a letter to the president of Dartmouth College, my alma mater, in an attempt to convince him of the need to create an elective course on the study of near-death experiences and shared death experiences and the implications for humankind. Similar efforts were already being made at the University of Connecticut and the University of Virginia, as well as a similar effort at our rival Princeton. I worked very hard on that letter into the wee hours of the morning and finally finished it and headed for bed. The next morning, I walked out to the mailbox at the end of my front yard, feeling that I had done something worthwhile, as my faith in an afterlife had certainly been growing. I put the letter in the mailbox and headed back inside the house. After I got back inside, I happened to look out the back window of the kitchen, and there, amongst the weed-filled garden area, was one big, round, white blossom staring at me. It was the only flower that blossomed the whole summer and fall. And I felt it was kind of a thank you from above for my efforts to promote a study of near-death experiences. The beautiful blossom was gone the next day, and I never did hear back from Dartmouth about that course. Nevertheless, I felt the white blossom was kind of a thank you for my well-intentioned efforts. The third incident occurred a few weeks after my wife Chris passed away on December 15th, 2019. This incident, like the first one I mentioned, involved my computer. My wife Chris was the consummate mom, and one of her daily activities was a phone call to our daughter Renee, who is a mentally challenged and who over 20 years worked as a bagger at a local supermarket. Renee is married to her special education classmate, and they live in a nearby mobile home park. Chris would talk to her by phone twice a day without fail. Now at Chris's funeral, I sung a few verses of a folk song for which I composed special lyrics to show my feelings for her. Without me knowing, my brother recorded the song on his cell phone and later on emailed me the video. I then uploaded it to YouTube and sent the link to several of my relatives and friends who were not able to attend the funeral. Now, this is where the incident occurred. But there is one more piece of information that's part of things here. For the past several years, I have uploaded many videos about the birthday events and anniversaries and a whole bunch of karaoke songs I have sung and uploaded them to YouTube, over 100. One of the videos that I made and uploaded was one of Renee at the supermarket where she worked for 20 years and finally, after 20 years, was voted Employee of the Month, and her picture was hung on the wall. And I went to Hannaford's and I made a short video of that. That was 5 years ago. I had totally forgotten about that video. Well, one evening after Chris had passed away, I turned on my computer because I wanted to listen to the song I had sung at her funeral. Because when I hear that song, it just makes me feel good inside. Now, when the song was done, the next video that appeared on my screen, and it appears automatically with YouTube. Once you finish a video, there's a list of other videos similar to yours on the right side of your computer screen. They're either made by somebody who made a similar type video, or there may be one that you have uploaded along some time ago. Well, this night, after I watched the song sung for Chris, up popped the video of Renee at the supermarket. I had forgotten about it. It had been 5 years since I made it, and suddenly there it was. And it was my feeling that Chris was trying to remind me that now that she was gone, it was my job now to call Renee every day and make sure she was okay. And since I have seen that video pop up automatically after her video, I have never missed a day without 2 phone calls to Renee every day. And I will say also that I have watched the song that I have sung for Chris's funeral many times on my computer since then. Never has Renee's video popped up again. I know Chris felt that she only had to make sure that popped up once to remind me of what I should be doing with phone calls to Renee. It only need to be done once. So anyway, that's the third incident. And I am convinced that Chris had something to do with that appearing. I would like to end this video now with my own personal feelings about what I have learned from all of this research about near-death and afterlife. I believe more than ever that there is an afterlife and that we all have a spirit that moves on into a greater realm after our physical body ceases to function. I believe the same thing that Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said earlier, her end-of-life researcher, and she said again that death is the shedding of the physical body like a butterfly sheds its cocoon. It is no different than taking off a suit of clothes one no longer needs. It is a transition to a higher state of consciousness where you continue to perceive, to understand, to laugh, and to grow. I also believe that God created us with a free will to cope with a very imperfect world. A world that not only has natural disasters like hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and earthquakes and so on to deal with, and we also have to deal with many poor free will decisions that men and women make that lead to wars and homicides and drug abuse and child abuse and on and on. God could have created all perfect human beings, and he could have created a perfect planet, but he didn't, and he didn't probably for a reason, I think. He wanted to see how our faith would grow as we coped with these things, and how we would grow and evolve over our lifetime here. And as Professor Kenneth Ring believes, and I do too, a very important message of the near-death experience is that it's what it says about how to live better in this life, with greater awareness, greater self-compassion, and concern for others. Near-death experiences have so much to teach us about how to live in this world, that we are at this very moment and throughout our lives writing the script that will govern our soul's posthumous journey. No one other than we ourselves is the shaper of our soul's destiny after death. That's what he said, and I believe that. I believe also from what I have researched that it's not only Christians that believe this, but also the followers of Buddha and Confucius and the Hindu leaders are also on the same page of thinking. Again, free will is so important. I believe that near-death experiences and shared near-death experiences are wake-up calls to all of us. The lessons we can learn from the testimonies of near-death experiencers are like what Professor Ring calls Tybo blood, a universal donor to spirituality and religion. I urge you to go to YouTube and watch and listen to men and women who have had near-death experiences. Again, it is not just what they say, but as Professor Ring says, the tone of absolute certainty that pervades them. It is not just a belief, but an unshakable assertion of a spiritual truth that has been unmistakably apprehended. In short, the typical near-death experiencer knows without question that life is not a dead end, but continues in an exalted form after the body has ceased to function. One might ask, why don't all people who have cardiac arrest and are resuscitated, and all people who have near drownings, and all people who survive horrific accidents, why don't they all have near-death experiences? I think the answer to that question is similar to the question of why don't all of us get contacted by deceased relatives? Why only some of us receive this special relief and comfort? I think the answer, it is faith. Faith, the greatest gift that God could give anyone, and he often leaves the door open to, is faith. And one message where we hear the importance of faith is in the Bible, when Jesus says to the doubting apostle Thomas, who would not believe until he had placed his hand in Jesus' wounds, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." And I feel I've been blessed that way. I believe even more than ever that God loves us and comes to us in many ways. For some, he feels the near-death experience is the way to give us a necessary glimpse of what the afterlife can be. And I believe God expects those who have been given that glimpse to become blessed messengers to spread the knowledge they have obtained. They now have the duty and divine privilege to tell as many of humankind as they can, as they are able to, about what the afterlife may be like if we only have the necessary faith. And as Dr. Mary Neal says, and I say, it is faith that sets us free. It allows us to fully embrace life, dissolve fear, and replace worry with hope. Faith allows us to confidently walk with God into a future filled with joy. So again, I urge you to look up near-death experience videos of individuals from all walks of life, of all ages, of all cultures, of all religions, and even those who have had no religious background of any kind. Watch and listen to their consistent, heartfelt testimonies. As Dr. Raymond Moody said, these experiences cannot easily be conveyed in writing. And if these near-death experiences are real, and I firmly believe they are, they have a very profound implications for what every one of us is doing with his or her life. For then it would be true that we cannot fully understand this life until we catch a glimpse of what goes beyond it. So thank you for watching this video, and may God bless you and your families.